From CGTN headquarters in Beijing, this is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. This week, Chinese State Councilor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi begins his 2025 visit to Africa, continuing a 35-year tradition of prioritizing Africa on China's diplomatic agenda. As China's top diplomat engages with African leaders, this trip reaffirms Beijing's strong commitment to its long-standing partnership with the continent, one built on mutual respect and, of course, shared development goals. To learn more about this visit, here's CGTN's Daniel Aramoy with the latest.
For decades, China's annual visits have reflected what analysts say is a deep-rooted partnership and mutual respect between China and Africa. According to experts, each trip is aimed at addressing key challenges facing Africa, from poverty alleviation and infrastructure deficit to sustainable growth.
China has been advancing the concept of win-win cooperation, and they truly believe that as they engage and connect with Africa, they're able to grow as a country, but they're also able to help Africa make progress in various ways.
Over the years, the visits have enhanced diplomatic ties and overseen the establishment of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. This year's trip is expected to encompass discussions on major economic partnerships in the 4 African countries.
The 4 countries that the minister is going to visit, and Africa as a whole, is looking forward to enhanced cooperation in various areas, whether we're talking about infrastructure, where China has done fantastic work in various African countries.
Beyond economic interest, the visits facilitate people-to-people exchanges. Analysts are optimistic that both China and Africa will continue to pursue their common objectives in peace, stability and development. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN.
Now, what does Wang Yi's visit to Africa tell us about China-Africa relations in the year 2025, and how will it strengthen cooperation in key areas such as trade, development and infrastructure? Now, to help us unpack the significance of this visit, we're joined by a group of panelists from Nairobi, Kenya. We're pleased to welcome His Excellency Mr. Erastus Mwencha, former Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission. From Abuja, Nigeria, we have Fortune Abang, Chief Correspondent at the News Agency of Nigeria. And from Beijing, China, we have Wang Jinjie, Research Assistant Professor at the National School of Development and the Institute of South-South Cooperation and Development. She's also the Deputy Secretary General of the Center for African Studies at Peking University. Chairman Mwencha, let me turn to you. A tradition going back 35 years. It is still relevant today. It is still very much alive today. What is your reading of Wang Yi's visit? Why is Africa still so important to China and vice versa?
Thank you very much, Mr. Wang. The relationship between Africa and China has many foundational and inflection points, starting with the Bandung Conference of 1955 that set the pace for Africa's decolonization, where China was a key member. And following, of course, support for Africa to decolonize, China also helped Africa in elimination of apartheid. And with that, of course, saw China's first development program, particularly the rail between Tanzania and Zambia. And of course, beyond that, of course, Africa also supported China in getting back to the UN by expelling Taiwan from the UN. And that foundational relationship built itself to new, and as you rightly mentioned in the introduction, that is based on mutual respect and development that is mutual. And of course, even after, during the Cold War, China kept close relations with Africa. But post-Cold War, China was one of the very first countries to establish a foundational forum known as FOCAC, of course, where China and Africa meet to discuss on matters development. And so this relationship has continued to grow from that traditional support for decolonization to now one of mutual respect, where the two peoples focus on people-to-people relationship, but also focus on development. And some of the key areas that are, addressed in this, of course, is transformation of Africa, which is key in that area.
Yeah, you talk about development, and that really leads to my next question. Professor Wang in Beijing, let me turn to you. Development is very important. There are numerous developmental projects and initiatives, mechanisms between the two sides. What do you think are the most important ones that China and Africa can keep working on in the months and years ahead?
Yes, thank you, Wang Guan. I think, as you mentioned, in many areas of the development, first of all, I think one of it we can focus on for the next step is the human capital development, capacity building. As we see for the previous stage, we have collaborations in infrastructures and trade, investment, but now we discovered that the importance of the human development, especially the knowledge, upskills, and now we see that the trading between China and African countries getting more and more. We need a group of young Africans who are good at the trading rules, international rules and laws, and also they needed to be prepared as skills in terms of e-commerce, digital transformations. Those are all need a very good human capital development strategies. With the capacity building, they can facilitate a better and longer, more sustainable development between China and African countries. And other than the human development, another is the infrastructures. We know infrastructure is a barrier, still a barrier to trade capacities or to investment efficiencies in many African nations. So the African government should prioritize investment in roads and ports and storage facilities to enhance connectivities within their countries and improve access to international markets like China, or to have a better acceptance of the Chinese and some international investment in their own countries. That would be the 2 points in my mind for now. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. There are so many areas that merits attention for the observers of China-Africa relations, reindustrialization, economic restructuring, the African Continent Free Trade Agreement that is really in synergy with China's own development goals and its goals of restructuring the Chinese economy going forward. Fortune in Nigeria, let me turn to you. You reported in Nigeria, you visited China, reported on China previously, and given that Nigeria is one of the key stops on Foreign Minister Wang Yi's 2025 year beginner visit, what areas are you anticipating to be discussed during this visit? How are the Africans, the Nigerians, looking at Wang Yi's visit?
Well, thank you very much for that question. It is indeed a very timely visitation, and we know so well that when the big weights come around like this, it always raises eyebrow. Why is he here? Why this time? What is the main purpose of this visit? These questions abound not just in the media space; it's also abound in the civil society, in the diplomatic community, especially as trends, are evolving in the world, in the West, in Europe, and everybody's seeking solutions. So Wang Yi's visit is timely and quite promising too in deepening China-Nigeria relations. China and Nigeria share so much in terms of similarities in population, in position at the continental levels. Both parties, have been bonding from time immemorial, and there seem to be much more both can really play, it's more role both can really play together in terms of their partnership and cooperation to achieving a lot more. People look up to them. People look up to China, as the second largest economy in the world. People look up to Nigeria as the biggest economy in Africa, largest population, in terms of the potential that are bound, in this kind of position both occupy. So when you look at this from the premise that Nigeria is among the 4 countries, in the first overseas tour by the Chinese foreign minister, It is indeed interesting, very, 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 very germane for me. I look up to an area where I really want to know why he came. I want to hear from his mouth. Why are you in Nigeria? You know, Nigeria, for instance, now is saddled with the responsibility of putting Africa together, you know, playing the giant role of ECOWAS chair and also its key position in Africa to bring in other countries together to have a shared future, you know, where China will need to partner with Nigeria, with Africa. They will have a very good voice, a common language, a common ideology. So this visit is expected to bring discussions that border, you know, on ways Nigeria can tap from China's pathways to modernization, traditionally through people-to-people exchanges, media and cultural exchanges, as well as advancing economic development in the new world order. We know so well that the world is bedeviled with lots of challenges. So what are the things that these discussions will really bring up? What suggestions, what areas are they going to tread? We know so well that over the 35 years of this foreign minister tour, there's always a new thing. So what's a new thing that we are looking up to? So this is an area I also look up to reporting. And much more, suffice to state that fear abound globally, that with emergence of new heads of state and heads of government, there's always that fear of discontinuity in partnership and cooperation among nations, especially with China, that is playing key role in galvanizing globalization. So what is going to be the fate of China, Africa, China, Nigeria? Is it going to be waxing stronger as the West, you know, as Europe is dwindling? What is going to be that new course that is going to be sustainable? So these are the aspects I also want to check. The world is also being challenged with technological, you know, advancement. China is setting the pace with artificial intelligence. How is it going to help Nigeria to come in this, you know, in this fora, in this means, you know, to be on the same level with the shared future, to drive such ideology in Africa, so that China will have an ease of trade, ease of operation, ease of cooperation with other countries in Africa. So these are the aspects I look up to. Much more in farming, in poverty alleviation, infrastructural development. So these are areas we look up to in terms of telling the stories and the narratives.
Yeah, exactly. This relationship is multifaceted. Chairman Mwencha, you talk about the foundations based on which China-Africa relations thrive for the past 60, 70 years. It was not built in one day, of course. And in recent years, China and Africa pointed out key areas of focus for these relations to advance for the next decades, including agricultural modernization, upscaling of the African workforce, a point Professor Wang has rightly pointed out, and also industrialization, integration of the African continent. In this regard, how do you see the synergy between the Chinese initiatives and mechanisms has with Africa and Africa's own goal of integrating the 50-plus African nations into one whole market?
Thank you, Wang. And I think both Wang and Fortune have really touched the core of that relationship. In terms of really the platform for the cooperation, it is under FOCAC, that Forum for China-Africa Cooperation, uses the Agenda 2063, which underpins Africa's quest for structural transformation, because Africa has remained a primary producer and exporter. But Africa, and I think Fortune has touched the core of that, now desires to move away from that to add value. I mean, if you look at, for instance, the mining sector, it is really pinned to the metropolitan areas where Africa remained one of the source of raw materials. But Africa is now saying, let's transform this so that we can create jobs for the many Africans, that, particularly the youth, but also Africa to embrace new technologies. Now, the synergy, of course, is that China itself, as the second largest economy in the world, has also huge population that the two can, leverage in terms of trade, but also skills. And Africa, of course, at the moment is, putting emphasis on developing its youth And a number of youth are now finding education in China. That's kind of synergy. But also, if you look at in terms of technology, China is, of course, very well advanced in most of the technologies that Africa is in need of. And China itself is also in need of the raw materials that Africa has. And Africa is looking forward to adding value to some of those within the continent. So there is so much synergy that between Africa. And one of the key areas that Africa is now looking at, particularly in the green development, China has been pushing for this globally, that really green development is the future. And we have seen China trying to move away from, for instance, carbon-based to now green economy, EV. China is leading. This is the kind of synergy that Africa would be looking for, so that Africa can also leapfrog and not follow the traditional route of industrialization. So there is so much synergy. And of course, beyond the development arena, even in diplomacy, there is so much cooperation between Africa and China, whether it is at multilateral level, because Africa has been open since colonial era, and Africa has always, asked for reciprocity. And we've seen, as Fortune was pointing out, the rest of the international community walking away from multilateralism. And this is the kind of, thing that China and Africa should continue to advance. And of course, with the FOCAC, not only the FOCAC, but also Belt and Road Initiative, but we have also seen the coming into being of the BRICS. These are the kind of forums that can also continue to advance global forum for discussions and discourse of international development.
Yeah, exactly. The rise of the global South and China-Africa, work in solidarity towards a more multilateralism instead of less multilateralism. Professor Wang, Chairman Wang just touched upon so many things. We're in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, according to the observation of many historians and economists. Artificial intelligence, e-commerce, in these new areas of digital economy and green development, what are the more exciting opportunities for Chinese companies going overseas, tapping into the African market? And how can these initiatives benefit Africa as well?
That's a great question. And it's also a very hot topic lately we've been discussing about, because we have very traditional way of collaboration and partnership with the African countries, for example, like very traditional ways, infrastructure building, trade and investment. But nowadays, there are with the technology and digital trade, it comes to the page. African nations, they should leverage the e-commerce platforms and digital trade channels to reach Chinese consumers directly, right? We see it's already happening, like platforms like Alibaba's Tmall Global, right? They can provide African producers with access to millions of Chinese consumers, particularly with the very niche products like coffee, organic spices, and they are reaching out the Chinese customers and being very much welcomed. And nowadays, we also noticed that when we are looking at the trade between Africa and China, the e-commerce and AI and the digital transformation can help diversify the export portfolios as well for African nations. What I mean about that, I mean is African nations, they nowadays they have exports like more raw commodities. We wanted to see African nations focus more on diversifying the range of products so they can export the China but beyond the traditional raw materials with the AI, more new technologies and the modern logistics systems embedded into the AI system and embedded into the digital platform. They can invest in value additions by their products, so they can shift from exporting raw commodities like minerals and unprocessed agricultural goods to be more semi-processed or fully processed good. That's going to help added value and also create more jobs. I think another thing we talk about the AI system should be linked to the green economy, as the guest speaker just mentioned. While the economy diversification is happening, the green economy becomes very important. It's linked to the new projects, new energy, new technology. When a country over-reliance on raw materials export, right, they can limit its economic reliance. So the green economy, China provides the financing and technology for renewable energy projects, including solar, wind, and hydropowers. Last year, 2024, we visited Ethiopia, Rwanda, and many other countries. We see the new green development empowered by the technology is happening. For example, Ethiopia, they have decided to ban fuel-powered vehicles and only allow electric vehicles to be exported since 2024. And Rwanda stops using gasoline motorcycles and transitions to electric motorcycles since this year, the January 1st. So these mark very significant step towards promoting green development with a new technology, aligning with the global trends in sustainability and carbon reductions. So nowadays, when we're looking at the dynamic between China and African countries, we witnessed many new things happening. China's role is to support technology transfer, establish the new programs to help to facilitating the development of the African countries in terms of this new trends and new happening. We're very looking forward to see the change and the structural transformation of African countries, and also the dynamics between China and African countries are changing tremendously, empowered by the technology and the digital platforms.
Yeah. I mean, thank you so much for pointing out all these very new and exciting dynamics happening between Chinese and the African continent, the African countries, and the African people. Fortune, let me turn to you. What are the specifics that excites you the most as a journalist? Because Professor Wang just touched upon so many things: solar, wind, electric vehicles, e-commerce, helping African coffee beans, getting sold to the Chinese market directly. What are the new exciting dynamics that you have observed? Fortune? Fortune, you with me? Fortune, my friend. Okay, Fortune, I'll let you...
I've observed that there have been remarkable achievements in the area of... Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now go ahead.
Hello? I'm with you. Can you hear me? Okay. Well,
Okay, Chairman Mwencha, let me turn to you. We've heard about so many exciting new developments between China and Africa. Does that excite you as well? I mean, when you think about these things, leap forward towards the age of green development, the digital development, empowering small businesses and households in Africa while helping the Chinese enterprises to, of course, earn a profit as well. I mean, this is a win-win.
Absolutely. And I think really going forward, as Wang has just underlined, it is this partnership should really not even embrace the new technologies, but also look at how to confront the challenges of development, because we have seen, for instance, when Africa faced, say, Ebola, China was at its doorstep supporting the continent, not only Ebola, but also COVID-19. So there are all these new challenges that are coming, like global warming, these areas that need cooperation. But to me, underlying what has been said, looking at the area of human resource, this is very key to Africa. Africa's population now, over 60%, are less than 30 years old. And if you look at that population itself, particularly those that are now being, coming out of universities, Africa is sitting on a time bomb, requires jobs. So creating jobs in Africa, training, skilling these youth that are coming out of universities so that they can create jobs on the continent, but also moving them to higher levels of technologies. This is what really would be transformational for the continent and where Africa is focus is. And of course, the second one, of course, if you look at infrastructure, already what China has been working with Africa, we have seen efficiency creep in. We have seen communications improve between Africa and China. We have also seen Africa improving its capacity, particularly in the area of energy. And there are so many examples from Morocco to South Africa to Kenya to West Africa. There is so many examples that really underscore this development. And so, yes, moving forward, Africa has put on the table under Agenda 2063, the programs are clearly outlined and tackling them on the basis of the priorities that Africa has clearly indicated.
Yeah, exactly. This year we're expecting a major summit of China and Chinese and African leaders, with Republic of the Congo now serving as the co-chair of FOCAC, and the year 2025 marks the 25th anniversary, a quarter century of the forum. Professor Wang, let me ask you, what do you think this year's FOCAC, should it take place, should be prioritizing on, and how can it set the tone for the next phase of China-Africa relations in areas such as development, trade, and cultural exchanges?
Yes, thank you, Wang Guan. Yes, when we are at the beginning of the new year, we're really looking forward to see new movement in terms of the China-Africa friendship and relationship. Based on our research and based on our understanding about the current relationship between China and Africa, we can foresee next stage there will be a strengthening the youth engagement. I think that's a very important topic. When we're looking at Africa, we see the unemployment is an issue, and as the former guest speaker mentioned, the large population in Africa, to help the youth to get the job, to have a better life, that's very important. So strengthening the youth engagement would be one of the issues that would be discussed frequently in this year and upcoming more years. And youth engagement play a very, very vital role in shaping the future for China and Africa relations. When Africa's rapidly growing, the population and technology and education of China has a very good place to do the technology transfer. So there is the opportunity out there for both sides, right? Scholarship programs, vocational training, and initiatives that would have more be put on the map, and high demands in African countries as well. Secondly, when we are looking at it, we would see more and more private Chinese companies, they wanted to go to Africa to explore opportunities there. They would bring their products and technology, and also would bring the Chinese cultures and Chinese understandings about the modernizations and the way of thinking to Africa more and more. So the exchange, communication, and cultural bonding become more and more tighter, become tighter and tighter. And we expect that happening with more and more small, medium Chinese firms leave China and goes to the African continent. While the future of China-Africa is promising, but we also see the challenges remaining, right?
There are a lot of challenges remaining, but that's all the time we have. This is a live show. We'll have you back next time to talk about all those challenges and opportunities. Your Excellency, Chairperson Mwencha and Professor Wang, thank you so much, and thank you for tuning in to this edition of The Hub. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. Our news coverage continues on CGTN. Take care.